Why did this movie flop? How do big flops happen? How can a film seem like a sure shot to everyone involved, only to wind up being a complete misfire? In 1995, after making a massive hit together, director Paul Verhoeven and writer Joe Eszterhas re-teamed to try to duplicate that success. The film was called Showgirls. They doubled down on virtually every aspect of the previous hit. The studio launched a massive marketing campaign emphasizing its risque subject matter. The film generated a lot of controversy, like the previous one, but it did not pay off the same way. It opened in the number 2 spot and cratered from there, falling short of breaking even. But now, nearly 30 years later, Showgirls has earned over $100 million in the home video market and has spawned books, stage adaptations, a documentary film, and a high-quality 4K remaster. A film that flopped, largely on word of mouth, became a beloved cult classic. It flopped and then unflopped. How? Our timeline starts in the early 1990s. Director Paul Verhoeven has successfully launched the American chapter of his career. He's had 2 major hits, RoboCop and Total Recall. Both movies are hyper-violent sci-fi action films, packed with satire and commentary. For his next project, he chooses Basic Instinct. The script is written by a Joe Eszterhas, one of the most brash and outspoken screenwriters in the business. Eszterhas makes headlines for taking home a record-breaking $3 million from the sale of the screenplay. Basic Instinct's marketing campaign is relentless. The most salacious scenes are at the forefront of the campaign, and the film generates a ton of controversy. The film initially receives an NC-17 rating, but the studio forces Verhoeven to recut the film to bring it down to an R. The marketing pays off. On a budget of $49 million, Basic Instinct ends up with a worldwide total of $352 million, an incredible return. Verhoeven and Eszterhas immediately re-team for their next project, Showgirls, and they bring with them what they learned from Basic Instinct. They make sure their contracts specify that this time there will be no recutting. The studio must commit to a film that is designed to be rated NC-17. Now for a brief sidebar about ratings. 1968 saw the introduction of the rating system we have today. In the beginning there was G, M, R, and X. M became PG in 1970, PG-13 was introduced in 1984, and then there was X. Now the MPA handed down each of these ratings, but they saw the X as something that a filmmaker would voluntarily give their film. Thus, they trademarked the other ratings, but they did not trademark X. 2 things happened. First, because the MPA had no control over its use. The X was used freely by the adult industry and quickly became synonymous with it. X-rated is still a colloquialism we use today. Secondly, X became a marketing tool, a sign of subversive content that intrigued audiences. In 1990, the MPA replaced X with NC-17, but this time it was going to be different. Many theater chains and video stores refuse to carry NC-17 films. Those that do might experience pushback from their malls and lease owners. TV stations don't allow these films to be advertised during primetime hours. And studios will often draft contracts that specify that films have to be delivered under a certain rating. Now, if your film gets an NC-17, there is an appeal process. If the MPA decides your film can be edited down to an R, and if you pay a fee. The MPA might give you specific instructions on what exactly needs editing. They might not be specific at all. An anonymous panel of judges will then screen your new cut. Members of the clergy may be present. There is no known structure or framework for what passes or fails these appeals. And if your film does not pass, it may be allowed to be edited again for another fee. The NC-17 rating is designed to be the kiss of death for a movie, and still is to this day. There have been several high-profile re-edits to avoid NC-17, and Basic Instinct is one of them. And after being forced to edit it down by mere frames, Verhoeven and Eszterhas designed their next project to be a direct attack on the NC-17 rating. In the lead-up to release, Showgirls draws ire. Gender and religion-based interest groups protest the film loudly. Politicians talk of depravity in Hollywood. Despite this, MGM experiences moderate success in getting venues and publications to run with the film. They even pledge to pay theaters extra to have additional ushers there to check the IDs of moviegoers. At this point, Eszterhas goes to the press and encourages young people to use fake IDs and do whatever you can to see this film. MPA President Jack Valenti hears this and calls Eszterhas desperately ill. Video stores carry 8-minute preview tapes of the film's spiciest content that can be rented for free. The tapes prove so popular that over 100 home video companies reach out to MGM, desperate to get in on the promotion. A website is launched showing a similar preview, and the traffic is so intense it melts servers and ends up crashing the site. The posters, the press tour, the controversy, the writer, the attention, all of this comes to a head in September of 1995, when Showgirls goes head-to-head with a violent thriller called Seven. When the weekend is over, Seven leads with 13 mil. Showgirls lands at number 2 with 8 and craters from there. Word of mouth is abysmal. Audiences boo, laugh, and walk out. Critics destroy it. It's over the top, it's cheesy, it's terrible, it's the worst thing ever made. At the Razzies that year, the anti-Oscar ceremony that highlights the worst movies of the year, Showgirls leads with 13 nominations and wins Worst Picture. The entire world laughs at Showgirls, and it closes its theatrical run with 20 mil. But now, for the first time, our timeline does not end here. In the decades that followed, Showgirls racked up over $100 million in home video sales. It has become a massive cult hit. Fans run their own screenings and perform stage adaptations. This is all covered in a great documentary called You Don't Know Me, named after the film's protagonist. Despite the initial rejection, audiences have warmed up to Showgirls, and it is now seen as something that fits in well with Verhoeven's filmography. Now that we have all the facts, let's proceed into our findings. And the first factor, as usual, is the most obvious one. The filmmakers taking on the MPA. The film was a direct challenge to the NC-17 rating, a 5-year-old solution to a decades-old problem. And let me tell you something, all right? The MPA is not a government agency. They can't just ban your film outright. It works because the MPA is in bed with every business around. They've got the muscle, and they're going to run you out of town if you don't play by the rules. The NC-17 rating is just a more perfected version of this idea. And so this brazenly European duo are going to push the limits of the R rating with basic and then threaten to replicate the X headache all over again. The MPA was not going to let that happen, all right? And it's hard for me to believe they didn't use some of their weight to encourage or at least artificially inflate the response to this movie as being some sort of filthy nonsense. The next factor has 2 parts. Showgirls did not connect with audiences, and there are 2 distinct reasons why. The first reason, presentation and messaging from both studio and filmmaker. It was confusing and betrayed the actual spirit of the film, to the point where audiences did not go into it expecting a camp masterpiece and a celebration of excess. The Showgirls documentary covers this well. When Showgirls won the Razzie for Worst Picture, Paul Verhoeven became the first person in history to accept a Razzie in person. And indeed, Verhoeven has been very vocal about Showgirls being intentionally over the top. Pre-release, however, is a different story. Throughout the press tour, Verhoeven and Eszterhas talk about Showgirls like it's this hard-hitting, gritty realist piece. Eszterhas calls it a morality play and a deeply religious experience. There is a production diary book published before the film's release, and in it, Verhoeven and co. talk about this film like it's the most serious piece of media to ever exist. Then after release, Verhoeven accepts the Razzie in person. Eszterhas talks about how often he and Verhoeven would laugh when going over the screenplay. Something doesn't add up here. In an interview given after Showgirls' release, lead actor Kyle MacLachlan states, "Don't let anyone tell you we weren't making a completely serious film." The confused messaging left audiences expecting one thing and getting another. And when modern audiences saw the film, free of all the noise, it was much easier to digest. Now for the other reason why audiences rejected Showgirls. It's the material and the subjects being satirized. The documentary goes into this too. When Verhoeven's lens was focused on corporate power, militarism, fascism, we ate it up. Even if the satire flies over our heads, it's shown through attractive violence so audiences can enjoy it at face value. But with Showgirls, his lens was focused on critiquing Western attitudes toward more carnal affairs. And the audience rejected it because these themes are so extremely taboo in North America. If you need any more proof of this, look no further than the rating system itself. I mean, graphic violence is afforded so much more leniency. Need I remind you that Showgirls was beaten at the box office by 7, one of the most horrifically violent films of all time. On to the next factor. A lot of flops are easy to see coming simply because of how loudly they tempt fate. In the business of movie making, you should never announce your plans for a sequel before the first movie's even out. Similarly, sometimes it is in your best interest not to be too loud in the press. Not only do you tempt fate, but people start to root for your downfall. And we've talked about the Heaven's Gate effect before on many cases. People like to watch artists fail, but this example is a little bit different. Sometimes a project or somebody involved with it will create such an obnoxious level of noise that the film's destiny is altered. The Heaven's Gate effect thrust upon it. Henceforth we shall call this an Esterhaus event. The one thing they love more than a hero is to see a hero fail. Writer Joe Esterhaus did everything but lock the theater doors himself. This guy's famous for making record-breaking amounts of money from selling his scripts, for being outspoken, for taking out full pages of variety, for biting the hand. And of course we know that the Hollywood studio system is perfectly willing to blacklist those who get a little too vocal. But in some cases they really don't need to. The audience doesn't want to hear that you made millions of dollars selling your screenplay. A lot of people think writing is easy. This film and the narrative that Esterhaus brought to it made it a much more attractive thing for everyone to want to watch burn down. This case was a goddamn bloodbath, and everyone involved is sharing the blame. It's the audience's fault for so eagerly boarding a hate train. That definitely doesn't happen anymore. It's the fault of the filmmakers for tempting fate, creating so much noise, and choosing to challenge the powers that be in such a clumsy and boisterous fashion. But what makes this such an important case is that it reinforces one of the core tenets of big flops, maybe the most important of them all. Box office performance has absolutely no bearing on the quality of a film. Good shit makes bad money, and bad shit makes good money all the time. Put it on my tombstone, all right? In the Venn diagram of the film business, you got art and you got commerce, and that little slice, that tiny sliver in the middle, is just happy accidents. That's all it is. Everything else is big flops. Case closed.